Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started. So hi, I'm Maury. Today we're going to talk about heads-up displays, which is basically, for most of us, it's going to be a WeakAura pack that's in the middle of our screen showing us all of the things. So what I want to do to start off with is talk about how you could customize or edit a pack that you found on Wago or from your favorite streamer or anything like that, and then we'll go a little bit into how to craft one of those packs for yourself. So to start with, I have Growl's Resto Druid pack here. I just took it straight off Wago, and it's just here to edit. So the first thing that I want to look at is I don't have a icon replacement here, so all of these icons have these little borders, and I don't love that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into every icon in this pack, and I'm going to set its zoom to 30%. So I'll just shift click and select them all. I'll go into extra options and set them all to zoom 30. Do that through all of these folders. There we go. So now they're all borderless. Now though, I don't love how close together they are to each other, so see how the icons are almost blending together? So how I'm going to change that is, in this pack, you can see that the whole Growl Resto Druid pack is going to be a week or a group. In groups, you can move everything around, and you can just rearrange them, and so and then you can nest other groups inside of them. So what Growl's done is he's rested a couple different groups inside of his Resto Druid pack. Several of these are going to be dynamic groups, so those are all of these bars. So he has an aura bar, a bottom bar, a top bar, and a vertical bar. And so all of these are smart groups. What smart groups do is, instead of allowing you to drag WeakAuras around inside them, they will automatically arrange those WeakAuras for you. And so you can see here, like with this Druid aura bar, it's set to be centered horizontal, so it'll start in the middle and the icons will go left and right from there. And then the aura order is set from left to right, and so you can actually change the aura order by changing the order that all of these auras are in the pack. Let me use the bottom bar as an example. So you can see here we have Bark Skin, Renewal, Iron Bark. Say I wanted my Iron Bark to be all the way on the left, I could just drag and drop it up to the top, because this group is again arranged left to right. So now that my Iron Bark is at the top, it's always going to be the far left icon. So that's an easy way to rearrange within a row or within a dynamic group. If I wanted to rearrange between groups, which for this one I actually do, because if we look at it, we have a lot of rotational abilities up on top, and then we have some more niche abilities at the bottom. But right now we have Wild Charge in those rotational abilities, and I don't love that, so I'm actually going to move Wild Charge down to the bottom row, because that makes more sense to me. So in order to do that, I'm going to find Wild Charge in the top bar, and I'm just going to drag and drop it into the other group, the bottom bar, and then I can double check that these icons are going to be the same size. So one that was in the bottom bar to begin with is a 40-40. Wild Charge also 40-40, so now if I close, that's just all better. I've moved my Wild Charge down into the bottom. Next thing, like I mentioned before, I wanted a little bit more space between all these icons. So that's all going to be in the group settings, these dynamic group settings. So we'll start with this top bar here. All I'm gonna do is add a little bit of space. So you have space and stagger. Space is gonna do, if I change it to 6, you can see there's a bunch of space in between the icons, versus if I change stagger to 6, it's gonna do like a ladder type thingy. I don't think I've ever seen someone use a stagger, but if you think that you can do something with that, that's gonna make it aesthetically pleasing and make sense, go for it. For now, I'm just gonna add a little bit of space in between all of these. Or a bar and a bar as well. So now I have a little bit more space between my icons. I also would like some more space between these top and bottom rows. So these are 2 separate dynamic groups here. So all I have to do for this is to take this dynamic group on the bottom and move it a little bit lower. Maybe a little lower than that even. Now when I close this, I have more space top to bottom as well. Cool. So what else could I want to do with this? Something that is a big part of most of these WeakAuras packs is the way that they're arranged. And Growl isn't an exception here. He's going to have abilities on the bottom, resource bar in the middle, so you can see my mana bar being this blue bar right here. I'll also get my energy bar if I shift into cat form, and if I actually attack something in cat form, he has the combo points show directly above that energy bar, so you can see them here, the combo points that'll also appear there. Then above the combo points are buffs. And so this is a very common thing in WoW where you'll have abilities, resources, and then buffs on top. For me personally, this format doesn't work super well because I don't like dividing my attention between my buffs and my abilities. I would much rather they all be in the same place. And so I'll show you a little bit about how I deal with that when we go into building your own WeakAuras from scratch. Until then, I'm trying to think of anything else that you could want to edit with the pack besides just arrangement. You can obviously add in any kind of WeakAuras here, so say I want to add in, I have this Ward of the Faceless Ire trinket. If I wanted to add that into, say, this top bar, what I could do is go in here and we'll talk about making WeakAuras. The easiest way to make a WeakAura is actually just to use the template. The templates are generally going to be really good for most of what you want to do. So if I go in, I want to make a pre-made aura based on an icon. He has these all of 40 by 40. And this is how you can add for any kind of abilities, buffs, debuffs, that kind of thing. So if I wanted to add another druid ability, it would be right in here. Also, obviously, PvP stuff and resources are in here as well. I'm actually going to use general for this, and I'm going to just start with a always active trigger because it doesn't have an option to make a trinket slot. So I'm going to make the trinket slot in mini. I'll get to that in one moment. That's an awesome question, changing the alignment. Let me... Ooh, I already have something called trinket one. Let's make a trinket mini. So for a trinket, we actually have this player unit info. We can use, sorry, I usually duplicate all of my trinkets, so I gotta double check where this is. Item, not player info. So we're gonna use item, cooldown progress, and we're gonna base it, you can use it based on a slot or an item. I'm gonna go for a slot because then no matter what trinket I use in trinket 1, it'll be there, and that's always gonna be my unused trinket, so even if I were to replace it with something else, I would still have that, as opposed to if I based it on an item and I put in the item ID here, it would only load for the Word of the Faceless Ire. And I'm gonna have it show always. And then for this one as well, we'll set the zoom. So now you can see that that trinket is just added in here. Going back to the rearrangement question, you can actually arrange dynamic groups in a lot of different ways. So I'm going to drag my top bar over to the side here and show you a little bit about this. So what it's at by default here is going to be that centered horizontally arrangement. If you wanted instead for it to go up and down, you can use centered vertically, and that'll change it to up and down. You also have just anchored on the left, just anchored on the right, just anchored on the top or bottom as well, so that instead of it growing centered on the horizontal or vertical, you can have it grow from an endpoint in either of those ways. You can also have it grow in a grid. If you would rather it not be a single row, you can then, from your grid, you can choose your row width. So if I wanted it 3 rows more than that, you can change this, and then you can again change the direction that it grows. Like centered vertical, then centered horizontal, it'll grow out in a grid from the center. And then obviously you have a lot of different options on how you want it to arrange around your anchor point. You can also have them in a circle. If you would rather a circle, you can change the radius so you make the circle smaller or larger. Could be fun if you have something that you want around your character at any point, but I think generally most of us tend to stick with the left or right, or up and down or side to side rows here. With this, like I said before, how you can rearrange the WeakAuras to rearrange them on the bar. That's, like I said, this aura order. You do have other options here where you can start from like the center and alternate left and right, and then you could have them go right to left or just left to right. And so changing up those will change how you can arrange these WeakAuras in the group to rearrange them on the bar. You can also put in a custom sort where they're going to sort by, say, ascending or descending cooldown, where you'll have on one side the things that are ready, and on the other side the things that have the longest cooldown left. For me, that would be very confusing to have spells in different places depending on their cooldowns, but if that works better for you, that is always an option as well. Let's see. Find it. So something here that you can notice, if I click on the dynamic group, you can see this frame that I have actually clicked on the group here that shows up as this white line, whereas all the actual auras are above it. So if I move it over here, you can see a little better. The boxes here, all the auras are above it. So how that happens is if you're in these auras inside the dynamic group, you can see that they have this Y offset of 75. For me, I actually would much rather be able to move them all together. So if I put that back down to a Y offset of 0, and now I click on the group, you can see that all of the icons are inside the box here. And that makes it a little bit easier to, my drag round isn't working anymore, but a little bit easier to move them all around together. That's also a really good way if you wanted something to pop out a little bit more. You could have one of these icons offset, like because this is a vertical bar, if I wanted something to pop out more, I could just stick it on a Y offset, and then I'm even talented into abundance to show you this. That really quick. And I'll show you how it shows up here. Versus... So where this Soul of the Forest icon is would be the regular row, and then my abundance one is just a little bit higher, as you can see.
Tranquility.
I don't know what else he has. So you can see these icons all coming up, and then the abundance one again is higher up, so it'll be more noticeable. Versus if you just have it in line with everything else. It's a little more. With that, that's most of the arrangement. You can, like I said, add WeakAuras here or subtract them. I would suggest, if you're going to take a WeakAura out, to always use the load never option as opposed to deleting it in its entirety, because you never know when you might change your mind. That also will make it a lot easier if you ever go to update a WeakAura pack, if you haven't deleted a bunch of WeakAuras that will then be reloaded. If you just set them to load never, you can update without updating the load conditions, and then it'll generally be a lot cleaner there. With that, I think we're gonna move more into making your own WeakAura pack, which I'm gonna drag this back. So this, what you can see here, is the Resto Druid WeakAura pack that I made. And I'll walk through and... Yes, we can talk about that. This is gonna be, so the request here... Hello, Jesse Tink. The request here was to talk about how to have things only show when you have them talented. That's gonna come into the how to make these WeakAuras from scratch. So first, let me hide this so it's not in our face the whole time. And I'm actually gonna start, so I have this load never as well, and I'll show you how I would start from scratch making a WeakAura pack. I do want to disclaim that if you are making a WeakAura pack, you do want to have a pretty good understanding of your class and what's important, because if you don't, you're gonna very easily be able to miss something that you really want to know and be aware of. Whether that's like, if you're a Resto Druid, not seeing the Soul of the Forest buff, or something like that, where if you aren't aware of what you need to see, it is going to be really hard to make one of these packs from scratch. If you have a better understanding of your class, though, and know what you need to be aware of, then making your own can be really helpful. So first, we're going to make a group, just like Growl did, where he had his just Resto Druid group. So we're going to do Resto Druid Dream. We'll start with that. Now we have a group to put all of our WeakAuras in. To start with, we'll do some of the simple ones. So again, here I'm going to use pre-made auras. I'm going to use icons. It doesn't matter what size you pick, especially if you want to change them later to make things bigger or smaller. For now, we'll just get a couple of our standard ones for rotation. So for this, if I pick, sorry, I'll show you what I'm picking here. Adaptive Swarm is something that is an ability that you will want to be pressing. So if I click that, I have a couple different options. I can show on cooldown, I can show on ready, I can show always and then have it turn blue when it's not usable, or I can have it show always and then check for a target. Because Adaptive Swarm is a targeted ability, I would almost check this one, but because more often than not, I'm going to be using Adaptive Swarm as a mouse over on frames, so I won't be targeting anyone to begin with. I'm actually just going to use the cooldown tracking option. So first thing, I'm going to set that zoom to 30, and then that's my Adaptive Swarm. I'll make a couple more here, so using different cooldowns. Snaring Ward would be a good one. Highlight when buffed is something that I really like because it eliminates the need for that buff bar at the top of your WeakAuras set. So like I said, I prefer having all my information for an ability in one place. That's the cooldown and the buff, as opposed to having the buff in a separate bar. So I'm going to use this cooldown and buff option. We'll go get a couple more. Sorry, that is something that I do an awful lot, but we do want to make the pre-made first, then check icon, and not just check icon off the bat. Swiftwind is important. This one again has an extra option where check usable. For this, because Swiftman needs a hot to consume on the target, that's what this one will show you. However, again, similar to the Adaptive Swarm, if you're using mouse overs and you're not actually targeting the person that you're trying to Swiftman, that one is going to not be very helpful, so we simply won't use it. I'll also put Grove Guardians in here. Same thing here. I'm going to show the cooldown and duration. And then the final one I'm going to put in is just going to be Wild Growth itself. It's down here. Alright, so now I have some WeakAuras, like some rotational WeakAuras. Obviously not all of them, but we'll start with just some. For this, from here, I need to make a decision whether I want to manually arrange these or I want to use dynamic groups. So I'll show you a little bit of the difference in what you can do using some of the other WeakAura packs that I created. So for example, we'll start with this Resto Druid pack. As you can see, I have 3 rows here. Main abilities, and then smaller cooldowns, and then bigger cooldowns, and they're all size appropriate for how often you'll use them. But you can see that these are just in rows. So if I want something like this, where all my WeakAuras are going to be in nice rows, that's going to be more of a dynamic group angle. If instead I want something a little bit more complicated, so let me show you my monk, for example. If we look at the Windwalker, I do have some rows here, rows of abilities, but I also have things that don't really align in the rows. Another example would be, for me, my rogue looks very different than what you would get in simple rows. So you can see there's like a square here of icons with an extra one on top. There's like 3 in the middle. Basically, there's just a bunch of icons going on here. So something like this would be more of a manual arrangement, whereas gotta hide them all. Something like this is going to be more of a dynamic groups. I think that generally, if you're starting off making things, dynamic groups are going to be a lot simpler to work with as opposed to manually arranging every single WeakAura, because when you get into manually arranging WeakAuras, you come into the problem where what happens when you aren't talented into that ability. and you still have that empty space for the WeakAura. You have to figure out what to do with that, which generally includes, well, if I didn't take this talent, I took another talent, so let me put that other talent in that same slot, but then sometimes it doesn't necessarily have an icon in the same way, and it can get a little confusing. So instead, we'll stick with dynamic groups. So to start off, I'll make a main rotation group, and I'm actually going to put all of these in there. So now I have this dynamic group. You can see that it defaults to aligning down. I'm going to change that into a centered horizontal. And then I'm actually going to move my entire Resto Druid stream pack way down in between my unit frames. So now that I have this first row, I can then add to it by creating more auras, or I can make an additional row on top, or I can do a lot of other things. Going back to the question about having talents and having your WeakAuras only load with those talents, right now you can see that I have only 3 icons. If I go into my Mythic Plus build, I'm going to gain a couple abilities here, and you can see now I have my Grove Guardians icon. So if you use the pre-made auras creator, you actually automatically, they will only load when you have them talented. If you want to manually do it, or you're manually making a WeakAura from scratch and you want to change the load conditions, that's going to be in the load conditions. You go down to player, you can select the class and specialization, and then if you check this talent and then use the select talent, you can actually go in and just click whatever talent. If you click it once, it'll glow yellow. That means when this talent is active, load the WeakAura. If you click it again, it'll do red with an X. That's going to mean when this talent isn't taken, load this WeakAura. And then if you click a third time, it'll reset. So I'll put this back to loading only when I'm talented in. You can see with Cenarian Ward, it's the same. It'll only load when I'm talented into it. You can use an aura talent. That's going to be mostly for things like that arrangement we were talking about. If you're manually arranging and you want a WeakAura in one place when you have this combination of talents, but in a different place when you have that combination, you can make that happen using these player talent or talent load options. You can also have them load in different locations or with different equipment. So if we went back to that trinket WeakAura, you could have the trinket WeakAura only load when you had certain items equipped. From here, I think I'm actually gonna jump because I don't want to make an entire new druid healer WeakAuras from scratch, so I'm gonna hop up and reload the one that I already have made, and show you a little bit about how that went. So the first thing that we have is a couple dynamic groups. First one is my rotation. This is the one that we started making. It has Adaptive Swarm, Wild Growth, all of my standard rotational abilities. Above that, I've made a second row of, like I said, those smaller cooldowns. If I wanted to make these smaller like this, how I did that is not anything with the group, but in the individual WeakAuras. If you look at any of the WeakAuras in my bottom row, they're all going to be 40 by 40 within height, as opposed to all these WeakAuras in the second row are 35 by 30. And so that's how I'm getting that size difference as they go up. And then finally I have the major CDs at the top. And again, in the WeakAuras, I've made those even smaller at 35-25 so that I get this nice little pyramid that I think is cute. With this, I've also added an extra dynamic group. This one is actually custom arranged, which we won't go into super far today, but this is just a dynamic group of show on cooldown WeakAuras for all of my utility spells. Then I have also added energy and combo points, which you can see here. I'll show you how I have these only load in cat form. And then I can see my energy bar here as orange, and then my combo points, you can barely see them here, but if I attack something, they also turn orange there. And then they go away as soon as I'm out of cat form. The way that I've done that is in each of these WeakAuras, I actually have a trigger for stance form aura, which is cat form. So this trigger is saying that when I'm in cat form, trigger these WeakAuras. Sorry. Other things I have in here, I have a couple of cast bars because I tend to not like the regular cast bars and resource bars. I'll show you really quick how to create one of those resource bars. Again, I'm going to go to pre-made auras. I'm going to use a progress bar this time. I'm actually going to do this in the folder that I made already. Find it. So if I wanted to add like the mana bar here, I would go in, create a new aura, pre-made progress bar. For a resource bar, I'm going to want it horizontal, and then I can just use resources, mana, and there's my mana bar. I personally hate the default appearance for progress bars in WeakAuras, so instead I'm going to change it. First, I'll change the texture. I use Wind Tools flat texture all the time for everything, but obviously just pick the one that you like. From here, I can also change the color. It's mana, so I'm going to make it blue. And then I can also choose a spell cost texture overlay. So say I'm casting a spell that uses mana, I can pick an obnoxious texture so I can see how much mana that's going to take. I can change the height and width here. I can change where it is on the screen. And then the last thing I would like to do with this is change the text on it. So this %in is showing my name. I don't need that at all, so I'm just going to get rid of it. Now it doesn't say my name anymore. And then for this one, it's showing me the amount of mana that I have. I'm going to fix the font into something that is prettier. But I don't really care about the number of mana I have. So instead, I'm going to use the % power. So you can see that it gives a list of triggers here. The %p is progress. That's going to be the default in a progress bar. For what I want here, instead I want the power %. So you can see under additional trigger replacements, the fourth one down is power with the %, and that's going to be $1 dot the words %power. And if I do that, now it shows me that I have 100% mana, and that's going to be a little bit easier for my brain to look at and be able to make an actual understanding of what's happening. I'll also change the anchor point of this text because I'd rather have it in the middle. For that, I'm going to go to anchors. I'll leave it on background inner and move to the center there. I can also change the font size should I desire. And so now I have a resource bar to go with my original WeakAuras here. I'm actually going to use this set again. If you look at the two different sets of WeakAuras here, one thing that you can notice is that the WeakAuras that I have and use are a little bit see-through, whereas the ones up here are completely opaque. If I wanted these ones to be a little bit see-through as well, And I'll show you here in a second that the ones on the bottom are going to become that opaque when I get in combat. So in order to have these fade out like that, what I will do here, I also want to know what this is being. Oh, it didn't leave the spell ID. We won't go into too much about what just happened with that, but that was just a trigger error on the WeakAuras part. But if I wanted these to fade out when I'm not in combat, I can select all of them. I'm going to add a condition here. So basically, all WeakAuras will function on an if-then sequence, where your ifs are your triggers and your thens are your conditions. So first you put in anything you think is relevant into the triggers, and then you would use a conditions to say, if this happened, then I'm going to do this. So in this case, I'm going to add a condition that if in combat is false, so if I'm not in combat, then my alpha is going to go to 50%. So this is how you would have them fade out. This means that whenever I'm not in combat, they're going to be 50% see-through. And you can see that here. Now they're see-through, and then now they're no longer. Ah, okay. A fun thing that we've discovered here. If you look at the mana bar, that is a really big obnoxious number that is not helping. It's just a very exact number of what I asked it to tell me. So in order to fix that, if we go into the mana and we go down to this % power, I can use format options. From there, I like to use number. From there, I can choose a precision. I can choose no decimal places, one more decimal places. I'm going to choose none because I don't like them. And then you can also have it round up, round down, or use like your typical if greater than 5 rounding. I'm just going to have it round down because that's easier. And so now, when I start using mana, I don't get the super obnoxious long amount of text. And then you can see as well that overlay that I put in for the overlay of mana costs is showing up there. Final thing, well, final is maybe a strong word, but the next thing I want to talk about is, as you can see, my mouse cursor itself is has information. So for me, there's a green leaf on the left, which is going to be my wild growth cooldown, and then I have a couple of other cooldowns shown on here as well. So how I've done that is, again, we would make a group. I'm going to call it, I'll make this just a normal group, not dynamic. I'm going to call this Resto Mouse. From here, I'll add a pre-made aura for something that I want to track. If you're a healer, you're looking at your mouse all the time, and so some of your more important cooldowns being next to your mouse can be really helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and put Life Bloom here. If I can find it. In the buff. So for that, I forgot for some reason that Life Bloom doesn't have a cooldown, which means that it'll be in this buffs rather than the cooldown. And I'm going to have it show I'm going to have it show always. Now I'm going to make this icon a fair bit smaller because it's going to be attached to my mouse. And then I'm going to, again, select the zoom. From there, I'm going to use my group, and I'm going to use its position settings. You can see here that currently it's anchored to screen/parent group. That's going to be your default. It basically means it's anchored to the center of the screen. excuse me, I can change that though to a couple of different options. Like I can anchor it onto a specific frame on my UI, or what we're doing here, I'm going to attach it to my mouse cursor. So now that it's attached to my mouse cursor, let me unload these guys again. You can see that I have that life bloom icon following my cursor around. And then when I buff it, it makes a color. Or it makes it in color, as opposed to if it's not buffed, it's buffed, it's faded out. So that can be super helpful. You would just make your WeakAuras same as normal and use that anchored to mouse cursor option. You can anchor groups, including smart groups, to your mouse. So if we go back and look at Growl's WeakAura set here. Sorry, I have a lot of WeakAuras. And we look at, he also has a mouse dynamic group. And so he's used this dynamic group, and it has these 3 icons basically that will show in order, depending on which ones are there. So you can still put that dynamically growing and shrinking group and anchor it to your mouse, or you can do it more manually with the regular groups and dragging around. So say I take this WeakAura here and now I give it like a Y offset. It's now showing above my mouse as opposed to like right on the clicker. Again, anchoring things to your mouse is generally going to be a healer problem, but could be helpful for some other DPS or tanks too. If you, for example, use like a mouse over interrupt, you could put your interrupt cooldown on your cursor, and that could be helpful. Another option is using it to put something on your cursor that makes it more noticeable. For example, if I come down into my monk's WeakAuras, I have this heart shape that's just like a rainbow heart that I have anchored to my cursor for no reason other than I have a lot of at mouse over macros for things like Bone Dust Brew or Ring of Peace, things like that. And so knowing exactly where my mouse is, because it's this obnoxious rainbow heart, is very helpful. And so you can do something like that where you're going to anchor something more noticeable to your mouse as opposed to something that's maybe more rotationally useful. Editing other things that we can look at, we can use different glows and borders. So for example, remember at the beginning when we were making this, we chose the glow when active option for wild growth. So now if I wild growth myself, you see it has this very obnoxious glow as it's active. Personally, I would rather it be not that. And so for that, we'll use this glow option. This is the glow that it's showing right now. It's called an action button glow. You have a couple different options. There's this one that's called a autocast shine. It just has little balls of light that go around. Or you have a pixel glow, which is like little lines that'll encircle. And then you have extra options for all of these. I am partial to the autocast shine style, so that's what I'm going to use here. I'm also partial to making it color coded. So for example, because this is wild growth, I would rather it glow green. So I'm going to have it do that with the custom color. And then this also for me is a little bit not noticeable enough. So I'm going to increase the scale, and that's going to make these little glowy bits a lot bigger. You can see that I have basically glowy bits on all of my WeakAuras down here for various reasons. Most of these are going to be that I just have them glow when the spell is active. And so that's how you can do it here, changing the type of glow. If you want to change when it glows, that's when you would need to get into this trigger condition if then style. So what it does right now is it looks for the aura. I know WeakAuras can be a little bit intimidating at first, and so don't be alarmed at all if you don't understand all of the different options that you have. It takes a long time to learn. And I really would suggest starting with all of these pre-made auras and looking at how they're arranged, and you'll start to get a sense of what these if-thens can look like. So for example, this one is my trigger is an aura. Auras are going to be buffs and debuffs, basically. It's going to ask me to choose the unit. Well, not so much ask me to choose, but it's going to have chosen the unit, which is player. That's myself. You have an option between like player, a party member, an enemy, those kind of things. It has an aura type, so it can be either a buff or a debuff or both. For this one, it's wild growth, so that's always going to be a buff. And then I'll put in the name or spell ID, and it'll show that particular buff. So now we're talking, this if is if the wild growth buff. There's a couple more things here. One that's checked is own only. So if I'm in a group with another resto druid, it won't count their wild growths, only my own. And then finally down here, it's going to show on auras found. So you can use an always, an auras found, or an auras missing. There's also match count, but we won't go too into that yet. So this trigger, this if now, is saying that if my casted wild growth is found on myself, then this is true. So now, if I go in here, if that whole thing that I just said, or trigger one active is true, so if that trigger is accurate, then I'm going to take my glow one, I'm going to talk about its visibility, and I'm going to check the box that it gets checked. So now, if trigger one is active, glow one visibility is on. And so that's how I got this. When I cast wild growth and I have that buff, it's going to glow for me. I know that's a little bit complicated, but hopefully it started to make sense, and you can always look back at the VOD later and or reach out and ask questions. Manny's asking if there's a troubleshooting workshop. We, depending on if people would like that, we can do one at the end. Next week is going to be a plater workshop again, and then the week after that, if people would like a little bit more of a troubleshooting, less workshop, more group question answer type situation, I would be more than willing to do that. Until then, lots of things with your WeakAuras. Let me go back to the pack that I made and try and remember if there's anything else. I have a couple other WeakAuras in here, like this one is a little silly. It just tells me when I'm in Boomkin form because I refuse to be a chicken, and so I use Glyph of Stars, and sometimes it's hard for me to tell. So I'll show you a little bit about that one. That one I did not make based on anything. I just made it from scratch. So making a text WeakAura for this one, it's very easy. The trigger is just the stance or form, which is Moonkin form. So when Moonkin form is active, this WeakAura is triggered and it shows up. No conditions, no nothing, just a very simple WeakAura there that does a very simple job. I'm trying to think. Okay. I guess we will go from that very simple WeakAura and talk a little bit about some of the more complicated things you can do. This one is a very specific WeakAura that I'll show you how it works. I just need to be in different talents. Excuse me. So, this more complicated WeakAuras that I have set up, I have to explain a little bit about Resto Druid for it to make sense. But this talent down here that I just selected is that every 3 casts of Swiftmend, you get Incarn for 9 seconds. And so this is kind of an old WeakAura, but what you used to do for the playstyle of Resto Druid is you would line up every of those incarnation procs with Convoke. And so that basically meant that you have every 3 casts of Swiftmend, which is a 15-second cooldown, you want to press Convoke. Convoke is a 1-minute cooldown. So you basically have 45 seconds to get your tree up, but 1 minute to get your Convoke up, and then you have to balance those and make sure that you press your Swiftmends at the right time. If that all sounds very confusing, it was. And I was confused and I did not like keeping track of it. And so what I made is this WeakAura that you'll see over here. It's going to be first my... Oh, first it has to be loaded. That's awkward. There we go. Now it's loaded. So it is the cooldown bar for my Convoke cast. And you can see there's 2 little tick marks here. There's an orange and a red. And then it's cooling down. Those tick marks are actually when I need to press Swiftmend by. And you can see that when I Swiftmended just then, that tick mark turned white. And then if we wait a moment, if I Swiftmend again, the second tick mark will turn white and my bar will turn pink. And that means that I am ready to go. My next Swiftmend will put me into tree, and I should do that in, 6 seconds when my Convoke is up. So basically, what this WeakAura was able to do is take this very complicated mathy timing thing and convert it into a very simple visual tool where, okay, I have this progress bar ticking down. By the time it reaches this orange tick, I need to have pressed Swiftmend. And then that one will turn white, say good job. Then by the time it reaches this second tick, I'll have to press Swiftmend again, and then this one will turn white, and good job, and then everything is always lined up for me. And so that's just one example of how something a little bit more complicated, like if I go into my actual triggers and conditions, I have 3 triggers here, and then 5 different conditions that are changing the color of the bar, the color of the ticks, and all of that stuff. And so that's one's a little bit more complicated, but as you can see, something that's very, very helpful in keeping track of your different abilities. Similarly, if you want to get really complicated with your WeakAuras, I'll use my rogue WeakAuras as an example. You can put a lot of triggers and conditions in. So for example, my pistol shot WeakAura has 6 triggers and 11 different conditions. And that seems very excessive. And it kind of is. But what you can do once you get more familiar with WeakAuras and are able to understand the trigger and conditions is that this pistol shot WeakAura basically just tells me all of the information I need to know about that ability, like whether there's a couple different talents that affect it, there is a couple different situations where you would want to hold versus use, and there's just a lot of different stuff that comes up with pistol shot as an outlaw rogue, and so I can see everything color-coded on this WeakAura very easily. Similarly, I had a very complicated here it is. A very complicated Roll the Bones WeakAura, 10 triggers, 12 conditions, and this WeakAura glowed when I was supposed to reroll. And that seems like a very simple thing, right? It glows when you're supposed to press the button. That's awesome. When you're in the game, if you have something that just glows when you're supposed to press the button, it makes your life and your decision making so much easier. That being said, when you're supposed to re-roll on an outlaw rogue is not very simple, and so you have to go through all of these different if-then statements. If this, then don't glow. If this, this, and this, then do glow. If this, this, and that, then don't glow. And that's where you come up with these like oceans of triggers and conditions. But if you figure them out and you are able to create this, it can make your in the moment gameplay a lot easier. So, things to think about. We won't go into like the structure of this or anything because it is relatively complicated and kind of a pain, to be completely honest. But very nice when you're in the moment and it just glows and you press the button. Explaining things simply. Oh, thank you. I'm glad that it makes sense to you. And I think a lot of people sleep on the fact that WeakAuras does do most of it for you already if you just use these pre-made auras. They're actually very good at most things, and it's just some of the more niche things, or if you want WeakAuras that what some people would say play the game for you, so something like this one that keeps track of your convoke and your incarn proc, or like I was talking about, that roll the bones WeakAura that just glows when you should press it. It takes a lot of thinking out of your in the moment gameplay, but it does put a lot of thinking into making that WeakAura for yourself. So a little bit of give and take there. The last thing that I want to talk about is custom WeakAuras and how much easier it is to steal other people's than it is to make your own. So basically, for example, there's this smart adaptive swarm WeakAura that I have that's just going to glow when glow on the person that it's best to press adaptive swarm on. And if we look at this set of triggers, it's all custom Lua code. And people make these for some fancy things. If you look at a lot of like we all know that Nelth WeakAura that shows you where to go, that is just completely filled with custom code. So anything that's a little bit more complicated and less just an if-then statement is going to be custom coded. And so honestly, find one on Wago and just grab theirs. Other things
I have
besides like this adaptive swarm or the Nelth one would be something like if you are a feral druid is the class that still uses snapshotting. Trying to make a WeakAura that tracks snapshotting is a lot more complicated. And so if you want something like that, I really would suggest just finding like a feral druid pack on Wago and either editing it or just taking out their specific bleed WeakAuras that track that snapshotting. Because it's gonna, at the end of the day, just be a lot simpler than trying to figure out how to make it work for yourself. Holy Priest don't feel like it needs a Wago. Yeah, okay, that's exactly what I'm talking about too, is that every WeakAura pack that I've found on Wago has this like abilities on the bottom, followed by resources in the middle, and then buffs on top. And that is just so hard for my brain to wrap around. And so that's how I ended up making all of my own, is because my brain doesn't work like that. And so I think it is really helpful to be able to put together your own. And if you ever have questions, if you decide to start putting together your own and you get lost at all, please let me know. Or if you would like a base to build off of on Wago, I can link you to my Holy Priest set, which is not very complicated. It's in, again, in that manual arrangement way, but all of the WeakAuras that I think you need should be there, and then you can just resize and rearrange if you would prefer to not make your own. Um, yeah, I just realized how whack my holy setup is from like a aesthetic point. I have like icons everywhere, but that's okay. Um, I think that's it, unless anyone has more questions to go over in regards to rotational weak auras, that kind of thing. If you do end up with anything, we do still have that cleaning up your UI channel in the LWIW Discord. Just at me at Maridi, and let me know what your question is, and I will try and help. It may include me saying, okay, we're gonna have to get in Discord and meet and talk about this because I have no way of trying to figure out how to explain this over text. So just a warning, but I will do my best to answer all of your questions should you have any. Other than that, thank you for hanging out. Um, yeah, feel free. Like I said, I'm around a lot. It might take me a little bit to respond, but I will do my best to just completely answer all of your questions. Other than that, I hope you guys all have an awesome day. I will see you around.